When Tim Duncan was a kid, his goal was never to become a basketball player. Instead, he wanted to become an Olympic swimmer. And after years of training, he was on that path. But in 1989, a hurricane tore through his hometown and destroyed the pool he trained in. With the pool gone and Duncan terrified of the open ocean, he picked up a basketball instead at just 13 years old. He didn't jump high, he didn't look fast, and most people just labeled him as too unathletic. But years later, that same kid became the foundation of one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history. So how is it that a potential Olympic swimmer became an NBA superstar? And how did a player doubted for his athleticism end up among one of the greatest to ever play? Well, to find out, we have to go back to September of 1989 in St. Croix on the Virgin Islands. Tim Duncan, like most teenagers on the island, has dreams of representing his country at the Olympics in the pool.
That was a big dream of mine. I really, ever since I was so small, I wanted to grow up to be an Olympic swimmer, and tried for many years to try to get to it.
Dedicating most of his free time to training in order to become the best he can be. However, Hurricane Hugo had been brewing, and by the time it arrived to the Virgin Islands, Hugo's impact was devastating.
An aerial survey of St. Croix reveals entire neighborhoods wiped out by the storm.
Thankfully, no one lost their lives, but almost everyone's home or place of work was destroyed, including the island's lone swimming pool. While coaches took the athletes into the ocean to train, Tim slowly began to lose interest in swimming.
And the ocean people you don't like. You didn't like that because you know that sharks is over there.
And Duncan decided to pick up another sport, basketball.
Yeah, after Hugo, I started playing, and we used to go all over the island just trying to find courts to play and places to play. And it just kind of went from there. At
13, almost a decade after most NBA players pick up a ball, Tim began to fall in love with the game. But something was different about him, because despite towering over everyone on the island, well on his way to becoming a 7-footer, Duncan lacked interest in becoming a big man.
I've always wanted to be a point guard.
Instead, he spent hours and hours studying another tall athlete who was outrunning the fast break throwing dimes or playing on the perimeter, Magic Johnson. A unique skill set developed outside of a traditional coaching program that saw Duncan begin to dominate. And as he was approaching his senior year of high school, his life was about to take a dramatic turn.
We have a touring team that comes through the islands. Alonzo Mourning was on that team. A guy named Chris King, who played at Wake, was on that team. And Chris King went back to Wake Forest and told Coach Odom about me.
Dave Odom, upon hearing about a 7-footer who could do way more than just rebound and lay the ball in, immediately offered the Virgin Island native a scholarship without even seeing him play live. A proposal that Duncan gladly accepted, leaving his tiny island nation of just 50,000 people to North Carolina. By the time his sophomore season had finished, Tim was already so elite that Team USA named him to their select team, a special squad chosen specifically to help the 1992 Olympic group dubbed the Dream Team prepare to win gold. And by the end of camp, the NBA was calling. Scouts were shocked at just how gifted Duncan was. Yes, he could rebound and finish, but also put it on the floor, pass, and even defend some of the greatest players to ever grace the hardwood. However, Tim decided to remain in college in order to finish his education.
My dad promised my mom that he'd get us through college, get all of us through college. I had an opportunity to leave. I didn't want to leave because I wanted to end my college career, get my degree, and kind of be done with that part of my life and kind of fulfill that promise.
Leaving Scouts stunned.
A local writer got hold of him after he made his announcement that he was going to stay and said, "Why did you decide to stay? You could have gone number one, you could have been a millionaire." The quote was exactly, "Why should I try to do today what I'll be better prepared to do at some time in the future?" Then,
the St. Croix native just continued to develop and decimate defenses, averaging 20.8 points on 60% shooting, 14.7 rebounds, 3.3 blocks as a senior, as well as being crowned as the National Player of the Year, earning his degree, and finally entering his name into the 1997 NBA draft.
With the first pick in the 1997 NBA draft, the San Antonio Spurs select Tim Duncan from Wake Forest University.
Chosen number 1 overall by the San Antonio Spurs, a team who had been solid all throughout the 1990s, but had just had a rough injury patch in their previous season, the situation Tim arrived into was unlike that of any normal rookie. Yet, the thing about Duncan was, he wasn't a normal rookie either.
He's now, as he says, a point guard deceptively packaged as a forward center.
He is the real deal, so to speak. He's as advertised, very skilled, great demeanor, great approach to the game, loves to play. All he wants to do is play and get better. He's blended into the team very well.
Playing next to current superstar center David the Admiral Robinson, Duncan recorded 57 double-doubles, had 8 30 or more point nights, helped the Spurs add 36 wins to their record, and was of course crowned as the league's Rookie of the Year. However, his first real challenge awaited him, the playoffs, specifically a first-round battle against the Phoenix Suns, a series that nobody thought the Spurs could win. So, Tim Duncan began putting forth his best effort in proving all those doubters wrong.
There's not a thing that McDyess can do there.
For the Spurs, Duncan now manning the power forward. Into Johnson. What a pass from Duncan.
Well, that's the other aspect of Tim Duncan's game.
Ahead to McDyess. Into Robinson. Rejected by Duncan. What a play.
Not only had the rookie showcased his full array of tricks in the first half, but what he did during this battle's final quarter shocked everybody.
What a great second half he's had with 16.
Hot Rod has good hands. He's got to watch the ball around Hot Rod.
Another time! Duncan cannot be stopped! He's got 22! McDyess, not Williams, but McDyess on Duncan. Duncan plowing inside. Duncan underway! He's gone mad! He's gone mad!
Tim's 10 straight points, inflating his total to 32, had firstly proved the Spurs were capable of defeating their rivals, and as the series went on, thanks to the boost their number 1 pick provided, San Antonio incredibly swept the team that everyone else assumed would be moving on. Yet, standing between them and the Western Conference Finals stood the rising Utah Jazz, and as Game 1 was coming to a close, the Spurs were given a final chance to leave this battle victorious.
Duncan has 17 of the Spurs 22, 4.6 seconds to go. It'll be inbounded at half court by Vinny Del Negro.
If I have it my way, I'd let Percy get the ball out on the outside because he's not as good at taking it off the dribble. That's
Duncan,
not what they wanted.
Missed it. Rebound. Brian Russell. Jazz hold on to win.
While the Lone Star State franchise would grab a victory in Game 3, the Jazz weren't going to be sent home, destroying San Antonio 4-1.
And we left that season really fired up to start the next year.
But there was a silver lining. The Spurs, thanks to the addition of Duncan and a healthy roster, had refound their form and were now clearly a legit contending team. Yet, there were still some issues they had to fix. Knowing full well the franchise needed some more firepower if they were to escape the second round for the first time this decade, the Spurs would acquire Steve Kerr, Mario Elie, and Jerome Kersey over the lockout extended offseason. However, when the NBA finally resumed in February of 1999, the Spurs ran into some serious issues. Their squad, led by former MVP and 10-year veteran David Robinson, was struggling, only managing to win 6 of their first 14 games. Yet, the Admiral, knowing full well he was no longer the same athlete he once was in the early 90s, humbly handed control of the team to his sophomore power forward.
He decided, hey, let me step back. Tim is an upcoming talent. Let me let him blossom and let me do the little things, because Dave done accomplished everything in his career. He has one goal left, and that's to win a title. A decision which saw San Antonio make a shocking turnaround, winning 31 of the following 36 battles, earning them the number 1 seed and a first-round matchup against the young and hungry Kevin Garnett-led Minnesota Timberwolves. But what Garnett faced off against was nothing like what he expected. Game 1, KG, in his 4th season, had already made a name for himself in the NBA thanks to his elite trash talk and ability to get under anyone's skin. However, when he tried this against Duncan, it didn't really work.
What really pissed me off was when the trash talking wasn't affecting him. So now you spending all this energy trying to rile this up. You done forgot about your own game. You forgot about they coming to you that you're supposed to. And then that's when I actually quit talking trash to Timmy because he wouldn't respond or he wasn't giving me the reaction I was getting.
Yet, when Timmy opened his mouth, it really got under Garnett's skin.
Tim Duncan, people would not see him verbally saying stuff because he wasn't talking sentences.
Freeze.
Timmy would hit you in phrases. Got you. Ooh, almost. This the worst right here. Nice try.
San Antonio sophomores 26.9 in Game 1 and 16.3 point and 10.2 rebound averages throughout the remaining 3 battles saw the Spurs take their first step towards the ultimate prize. But with 18.1 seconds remaining in Game 2 of their second round series, the Texas franchise was in serious danger of losing their home court advantage against the surging Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal-led Los Angeles Lakers, unless their own rising star could do something about it.
Screen and roll. Duncan setting the screen. Plenty of time left. They go down low to Duncan, guarded by Reed, and Duncan's turnaround scores.
Now Fisher's down on the baseline. He's coming off a Shaq to the corner.
And they get it in the
knocks away. Johnson causes the turnover. Ellie has it and he's fouled.
Johnson with the big defensive play with his 5th steal. The Spurs lead by 3 and no timeouts remaining. Here is Kobe Bryant checking the clock, going up for the shot. No good. The game is over and the Spurs win their second in a row.
Not only did San Antonio go on to sweep Los Angeles out of the playoffs, but they would repeat the exact same level of domination against the Portland Trail Blazers in the Western Conference Finals, meaning the Spurs, for the first time in franchise history, was heading to the NBA Finals. However, their rival was on a Cinderella run of their own, because the New York Knicks, led by a dominant Latrell Sprewell, despite being the 8th seed, had shocked every team they battled on their own journey to the championship round. Yet, there was one big issue. Patrick Ewing, their dominant big man, was absent after suffering an Achilles tear in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Therefore, the Knicks, facing 2 7-footers in Robinson and Duncan, struggled. Tim would add in a massive 33 points in Game 1 and then round up the series shortly after by scoring 31, as San Antonio easily dealt with the hobbling Knicks, earning them their first ever NBA championship. To make things even sweeter for their second-year forward, Tim was crowned as the second youngest Finals MVP in history.
Hey, it doesn't get any easier from here, I hope you know that.
Oh yeah, I know that.
April 11th, 2000. Once again, the Spurs are in the hunt for a top 4 seed in the Western Conference as they look to defend their crown in the 1999-2000 season. However, after dunking all over the Sacramento Kings, Duncan would come down and tragically tear his meniscus, ruling him out for the remainder of the season, resulting in the Spurs being easily defeated in just the first round. However, this was only the start of the tragedies for San Antonio, because now a free agent, Tim Duncan, being so far away from his home in the Virgin Islands and allured by an offer from the Orlando Magic, who were looking to form a super team with himself, Tracy McGrady, and Grant Hill, was ready to make the move to Florida. But a simple question posed by Duncan and his wife, checking to see if his family would occasionally be allowed to travel with him on the team plane to away games, derailed everything. The Magic, led by head coach Doc Rivers, weren't going to permit this. Meanwhile, the Spurs, throughout Tim's 3-year tenure, did. So, the one-time Finals MVP remained a San Antonio Spur. Duncan then went on in the 2000-2001 season to continue his domination, averaging 20.2 points, 12.2 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks, as San Antonio reclaimed their spot atop the West and returned once again to the conference finals after only losing a single game en route. Yet, the current defending champions, the Los Angeles Lakers, who had been turned into the most dominant force in the league thanks to the acquisition of now 7-time title-winning head coach Phil Jackson, and the growth of their dynamic Shaq and Kobe duo, was simply unstoppable. Not even an impressive 40-point effort in Game 2 from Tim Duncan could push the Lakers even slightly off their path of destruction, as Los Angeles would go on to win back-to-back championships. A tragic tale which unfortunately repeated itself in the following season, while Tim was growing in his role, managing to be crowned as the NBA's MVP. But not even being touted as the best individual player in the league could stop Los Angeles from simply steamrolling right past them in the second round. To make things worse, with David Robinson announcing his retirement at the end of the following season, and without any real help, San Antonio's dominant 4-year run was seemingly coming to a close. Or was it? The arrival of Manu Ginobili, the Spurs' 57th pick back in the 1999 draft, was seemingly the first domino in what San Antonio was hoping would be the season they finally turned things around. Yet, the man who was going to lead that charge was the one who slowly began to realize just how important he truly was for his franchise. And without him, San Antonio was going nowhere.
He's somebody who's naturally, intrinsically quiet, but I realized that he was going to have to step up in that regard, and he did that.
Duncan's 23.3 point, 12.9 rebound, and 2.9 block averages.
Timmy was just unbelievable. He was in his prime, he was the franchise, and everything went through him, and he delivered offense, defense.
Plus, the emergence of multiple players on their roster, from second-year point guard Tony Parker to now healthy forward Stephen Jackson, and Ginobili's explosive play off the bench, San Antonio managed to win an insane 60 games. However, what happened in Game 1 of their first-round series against the Phoenix Suns stunned the NBA world. Stephon Marbury's game winner revealed a harsh truth for the Spurs. Even though they had a now 2-time MVP leader,
you've got the first player since Michael Jordan to win back-to-back MVP awards,
they were still vulnerable. Nothing was ever going to be handed to them, and their squad needed to work for everything. So they did. Tim would destroy any Phoenix Sun who dared to enter the paint, sending 6 shots flying in Game 2 and then 4 in the series-ending 6th battle. Momentum, which the franchise rode during their first 2 matchups against the defending back-to-back champion Los Angeles Lakers to hold a 2-0 lead. However, the Lakers, hell-bent on becoming the first team since the 1960s to win 4 straight, never gave up. Not even 32-point and 10 rebound averages from Timmy in games 3 and 4, plus a 16-point Spurs lead in their 4th battle could slow down Shaq and Kobe. To make matters worse, with 14.2 seconds left in game 5 and only up 2, the ball was swung to a player who had begun to make a career out of never missing game winners, Robert Big Shot Bob Horry. Heartbroken by this near miss, LA head coach Phil Jackson decided to punish the 6'10" Robert Horry by having him guard Tim Duncan for some reason. They had Shaquille O'Neal. Why is Horry guarding Duncan? Whatever. Phil probably knows what he was doing. Or maybe he doesn't. Anyway, what do I know? Resulting in San Antonio's 2-time MVP putting in work, scoring 37 points, grabbing 16 rebounds, and finally getting revenge against the franchise who had sent them packing in the past 2 seasons. But 2 questions remain. Could San Antonio really defeat their next opponent, the Dallas Mavericks, and return to the finals? Or would this be the end of their journey? Game 1. The Spurs, on the back of their superstars' 40-point night, are up 14 points with 8 minutes to go in the final quarter. All they have to do now is just exchange punches with Dallas, and an initial game victory was theirs. Only they didn't swap blows with the Mavericks. They stopped fighting altogether. 38 points from Dallas superstar Dirk Nowitzki, and 26 and 22 from their second and third options, Michael Finley and Steve Nash, saw that lead evaporate and the Spurs losing their home court advantage. So, was this the end of San Antonio's title hopes? Would the Mavs' 3-pronged approach be too much to handle? May 29th. 2003, down 15 points with 2.5 remaining in the third quarter, just 14 minutes away from the Mavericks forcing a deciding Game 7, San Antonio crept closer and closer to once again failing to earn their second title. Therefore, The Spurs just did what they had always done, locked in to their methodical approach on both sides of the floor, focusing solely on trying to win the possession in front of them, whether that was scoring offensively or producing a stop defensively. Then, slowly but surely, San Antonio began to erase Dallas's lead. Yet, the thing is, it was never all about Tim Duncan, because unlike any other franchise in the NBA, the Spurs focused on playing team basketball, and while their offense generally flowed through their big man, it was never about him, a mindset that saw players like Steve Kerr add in 4 threes. Stephen Jackson dropping a game-high 24, and Ginobili proving he belonged in the league as San Antonio incredibly clawed their way back, a 42-15 run that saw the Spurs returning to the NBA Finals. But could they really get it done and win their second title in just 5 seasons? Game 5. The New Jersey Nets, after getting swept in the 2002 finals by the Lakers, had returned this season ready to prove that they were a legit championship contending team, and in games 2 and 4 they had done just that. Now the Spurs were faced with an almost impossible task. They had to win tonight on the road, otherwise their rival would be a single victory away from the trophy that they so desired. Therefore, Duncan got to work, whether it was on the offensive end with his methodical pace or on the other side of the ball.
Blocked by Duncan.
The Spurs superstar was truly doing everything. While his stats weren't near his insane Game 1 numbers of 32 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, and 7 blocks, he had pushed San Antonio to now be comfortably in the driver's seat as the buzzer rang at the end of Game 5. But like any great performer, he saved his best for last. Game 6. Tim Duncan, the man who started playing at 13 simply for the reason that he didn't want to swim in the ocean, was unstoppable. However, unlike other superstars, it wasn't just in a single category, because Duncan literally did everything. 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and allegedly 10 blocks. An unofficial quadruple double, one of only 5 in NBA history, had seen his Spurs return to the mountaintop of the NBA, and Tim rightfully winning his second Finals MVP. Also, according to the NBA, these 2 blocks didn't count, which meant Tim Duncan ended the game with a triple-double, not a quadruple-double, but I'll let you be the judge. Should they have been added to the total, or did the scorers table have it right? Let me know below. Now, there are only 2 things Tim Duncan had yet to achieve: defend his crown and achieve his childhood dream of winning an Olympic gold medal. May 13th, 2004, with the second round series tied at 2 apiece and the Spurs down 1 with 5.4 seconds remaining, San Antonio needed a miracle if they were once again going to beat their longtime rivals.
He gets doubled, Shaq all over him. He gets away, a fadeaway. He makes it with 4:10 left. Unbelievable.
So, surely Duncan's apparent game winner had placed them ahead 3 games to 2.
Here they go. They get it to Fisher. He scores! Derek Fisher scores at the buzzer!
Derek Fisher's incredible game and eventual series-saving jumper had crushed Tim's dream of being able to repeat, devastating the superstar.
It was a frustrating time. It was a tough time, being up 2 games and then losing the series.
To make matters worse, after being named to the United States men's basketball team for the 2004 Olympic Games and then subsequently losing in the semi-final to teammate Manu Ginobili and his Argentinian side, Tim had also failed at his other dream. So, was this the end of the rising San Antonio dynasty? Would Tim Duncan ever earn the gold he so desired? And are you subscribed? May 19th. 2005. Just a single victory away from another Western Conference Finals, the Spurs superstar would tragically come down with what should have been a game-ending ankle injury, but not for Timmy D.
I can't believe he kept playing on it, but he would have had me assassinated if I, kept him out of the game any longer than I did.
And with 14.4 seconds left and the scores tied, they needed their 2-time MVP more than ever.
Into the hands of Ginobili. They'll hold it for the final shot. Ginobili to Duncan. Duncan puts it in with 5/10 of a second remaining. And the Spurs take a 2-point lead. Timeout Seattle. But they have plenty of time to get off a quality shot. They'll advance to the front court with the timeout. So this one is not over. Be careful not to foul, especially foul Ray Allen. Allen comes free, puts up a three. Oh, it just misses. And the Spurs advance to the conference finals.
Then the Spurs just steamrolled the Suns 4-1. Barely broke a sweat. Not even going to talk about it. But now the real challenge awaited the defending NBA champions, the Detroit Pistons. A team that was seemingly built to slow down both the Lakers and Spurs' big man-centric offense due to their insane depth at the center position.
The biggest challenge for me is they had a three-headed athletic monster that I just kept rotating to me every time, and it was a different challenge for every one of them.
From Ben Wallace to Rasheed Wallace and Antonio McDyess, Detroit slowed Duncan to just 18 points on 39% shooting from the field over their first 4 battles, resulting in the finals being tied at 2 apiece. To make things worse, as the halftime buzzer sounded in Game 5, San Antonio found themselves down, now just 24 minutes away from allowing their rival to be 1 win away from defending their crown. However, at halftime, sitting in his locker, angered by his performance, new San Antonio Spur Robert Horry wasn't going to let his franchise down.
Horry with Rasheed Wallace coming after, contested, and he puts it up over him. The perfect pass. Ginobili lays one up short, but Horry is there to follow. How about this guy? Big shot bomb, hits from three-point land or something like that to tie the game. Lock down, either post, run a spin move, or take Parker off the dribble. 30 for him. Horry. Robert Horry. Doesn't matter what uniform he wears, what arena it's in. Robert Horry.
While Manu Ginobili would miss the game winner, Horry's heroics had extended this game by 5 minutes. And guess what? Robert didn't stop.
Horry drives all the way in and with a left hand with a dunk, and he gets fouled as well. Under on Parker. Here's Ginobili to Horry for 3. Oh, unbelievable. This guy is off the charts.
Big Shot Bob's impossible 21-point night had saved San Antonio. But with Detroit avenging this failure in Game 6, it all came down to this. Game 7. Win and be crowned kings of the NBA. Losing a championship sucks. Do I need to say any more? While the Pistons had their own three-headed snake, which they deployed to slow Duncan, San Antonio had seemingly formed one of their own, with Manu Ginobili firmly grabbing a hold of the Spurs' second option role during the finals by adding 23 points and Horry placing a crucial 15 on the board off the bench, plus Tim Duncan continuing to dominate despite all the defensive pressure.
Duncan puts it on the floor. Lays it off to Ginobili with 2 on the clock. Huge.
The San Antonio Spurs had done it. Tim Duncan had won his 3rd NBA championship and 3rd Finals MVP. Now, the only thing left to do was defend his title and win the franchise their first back-to-back trophy. May 22nd, 2006, Tim Duncan, hell-bent on finally earning repeat rings, had scored a shocking 41 points in this must-win battle against their cross-state rivals, and with Manu Ginobili nailing a massive 3, giving the Spurs a 3-point cushion with 32.2 seconds remaining, Duncan's dream was getting closer and closer until
21 points for Ginobili, 19 in the second half. Nowitzki goes right at Bowen. And the foul! So Nowitzki to the line with a chance to tie the game. Nowitzki 12 of 13 at the line. He now has 35 points, and the game is tied at 104.
However, just like 2004, the Mavericks had gifted San Antonio just enough time, and Manu the chance to correct his mistake.
5, down to 4. Down to 3. Ginobili squeezes through. Duncan on the follow. The shot blocked. And we go to overtime.
But due to Ginobili's failures on both the defensive and offensive side of the floor, it was unfortunately the Mavericks moving past San Antonio.
We were all hurt. The faces were really sad, and it was hard to talk to each other because how upset we felt.
So would the Spurs actually be able to return to the highest stage of basketball? Would they ever repeat if they did? Or was this the start of the end of the San Antonio dynasty? Angered and fueled from their failure, the methodical San Antonio Spurs were simply unstoppable on their route back to the NBA Finals. Tim had averaged 23.8 points, 11.5 rebounds, and 3.3 blocks, resulting in the Spurs only losing a single battle as they found themselves just 4 wins away from another Larry O'Brien trophy. Yet their opponent was none other than a 22-year-old LeBron James, a player who had carried his lowly roster that only had a single player on it who had experience at this stage of the playoffs into the ultimate round. But this inexperience, compared to the Spurs' dynasty, showed. San Antonio easily picked apart the Cavaliers both offensively and defensively, winning games 1, 2, 3, and 4 with ease, and earning Duncan his 4th Larry O'Brien trophy. So, would the 2007-2008 season finally be the year Duncan defended his crown? Well, as the 07-08 season's trade deadline rapidly approached, the league was shocked by a move the Los Angeles Lakers had managed to somehow pull off.
When Mitch Kupchak came to you and said something like, "I can get you Pau Gasol for Kwame Brown," what did you say back?
No, you can't. But
and Spanish treasure arrives on the shores of Los Angeles. Last little nugget, simply the biggest NBA in-season trade so far this year, as the Lakers acquired talented big man Pau Gasol from the Grizzlies.
Retooled thanks to the addition of elite high IQ center Pau Gasol and the maturing of Kobe Bryant since the departure of Shaquille O'Neal in 2004, the Lakers quickly became the title favorites, a point that after the Spurs barely fought their way out of a 7-game round 2 series against the Charlotte Hornets, that LA proved. While Bruce Bowen, San Antonio's defensive specialist, used to be able to, at the very least, force Bryant into an extra miss or two in the early 2000s, now at 36, he struggled to keep up with a smarter Kobe, who went on to average just under 30 points. Coupled with Manu Ginobili struggling with ankle issues, no matter what Duncan did, it was never enough, and Los Angeles ultimately moved on to the finals. To make matters worse, with Ginobili's ankle only getting worse at the 2008 Olympics, he now required surgery that forced San Antonio's bench star to miss most of the following season, a tragic fact which resulted in the Dallas Mavericks easily disposing of Duncan's Spurs in just the first round of the 2008-2009 season, and with Tony Parker suffering a similar fate to that of his backcourt running mate in the 2009-10 season, the same result was on the horizon. Or was it? Because with Parker out, the Spurs' second-year backup guard, George Hill, was thrown into the deep end, going from starting just 7 battles in his rookie year to 43. And while he had only scored a total of 7 points in Game 1 and 2 of their first-round series against Dallas, the following matchups saw Hill go nuclear. Not only did he score 29 points on 5 made threes in Game 4, but his 19.8 point average on 54% shooting had incredibly propelled the Spurs past their cross-state rival and into another familiar matchup with the Phoenix Suns in round 2, where the Suns would finally avenge all their failures, sweeping the aging Spurs. While San Antonio surged in the 2010-2011 season, going all out and earning the Western Conference's #1 seed, they were once again defeated far short, really far short of their 5th championship goal, because they weren't eliminated in the Western Conference Finals or even the second round. No, the 8th seeded Memphis Grizzlies were the team who sent them packing in just the initial round. A devastating fate, which saw many begin to assume that the Spurs' incredible 4-time championship winning dynasty had finally fallen, unless they were to make a major move. Chip England, the Spurs' specialist shooting coach, was tasked with scouting players at the 2011 draft combine, and when he saw a potential lottery pick sneaking into a scrimmage despite being banned from competing live due to where he was likely to be picked, Chip knew the Spurs had to have him.
With the 15th pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Indiana Pacers select Kawhi Leonard from San Diego State University.
So, despite head coach Greg Popovich not even believing in Kawhi, viewing him simply as a big guy who rebounds, San Antonio, much to the dismay of their fans, traded George Hill to the Pacers in exchange for Leonard, a decision with the Spurs winning their final 10 regular season games and Kawhi providing instant, high-level defensive impact that San Antonio fans quickly accepted. Finally, with a fully healthy roster and the addition of Kawhi, the Texas franchise incredibly swept both the first and second rounds, setting up a Western Conference Finals against the surging Oklahoma City Thunder. But the dominance didn't end here. San Antonio's consistent, well-balanced offensive approach, Tony Parker scoring 18, Tim 16, and Manu pouring in 26 off the bench in Game 1, plus 34 from Tony, 11 from Duncan, Kawhi's 18, and 20 off the bench courtesy of Ginobili, saw the Spurs be just 2 wins away from the finals. However, Thunder head coach Scott Brooks made a decisive move in an attempt to save his franchise, shifting defensive focus guard Thabo Playton Max's Cephalosha onto Tony Parker. Thabo would then live up to his reputation, reducing Parker's field goal percentage from 61% down to 41%. And even though Tim, who was 35 at this point, adding in 21 in Game 4 and 25 in Game 6, it was unfortunately Oklahoma City punching their ticket to the finals. Yet, the acquisition and quick development of Kawhi gave San Antonio hope for the future, and their risky draft day trade was about to pay off. June 18th, 2013. San Antonio is back. First and third round sweeps, plus Game 1, 3, and 5 victories, and a massive fourth quarter run in Game 6 meant the Spurs were literally a minute away from their 5th NBA championship. The Texas franchise was so close, in fact, that Miami Heat fans began to leave the arena, not wanting to watch their new rival be crowned on their own home floor. And it wasn't just Heat fans who thought this. The NBA began to rope off the court, and the Larry O'Brien trophy had been wheeled out, sitting in the tunnel, waiting for the Spurs to hoist it above their heads. But Miami never gave up.
Picked up by Miller, back out to James, another 3, it's good! James knocks it down!
With Kawhi only making 1 of his 2 free throw attempts following this clutch 3, San Antonio had to get a defensive stop here or risk the game heading to an extra period.
Bosh, back out to Allen, his three-pointer, bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining!
Motivated by their improbable comeback, not only would Miami go on to win Game 6, but incredibly, somehow, some way, achieve the impossible and do what the Spurs had failed to time after time after time, winning back-to-back titles. Tim Duncan was devastated, laying on the floor in their locker room, vowing to never let this happen ever again. Yet, given the age of everyone on their roster, would they even be able to make it back into the finals anyway? As the San Antonio Spurs began their training camp for the 2013-2014 season, Coach Pop made his squad sit down and watch Game 6 from tip to the insane Ray Allen game winner and their eventual failure in overtime. Popovich pointed out every mistake San Antonio made, making it clear that it wasn't a missed free throw or 2, or the fact Duncan was benched for the game-saving possession that cost them their 5th Larry O'Brien trophy. No, there was so much more they could do. So, the Spurs got to work and began to birth what would later be dubbed the beautiful game. With a roster loaded with international talent, 11 different nations being represented, and guided by a coach who gave nobody superstar treatment. If anything, he was harder on his franchise centerpiece, Tim Duncan. The Spurs would go on to win an incredible 62 games and stand atop the Western Conference.
Losing last year kind of, I think, lit a fire under a lot of us more than any other year past, especially Pop. I think it really, it's not gone away. Although he says it's behind, it's not gone away. So now we went through the whole season and went through the process, and now we're back here.
Then, despite some hard postseason battles, which only served to further prepare them for their ultimate goal, San Antonio had once again returned to the game's highest stage.
You guys waited a year. Finals last year was a devastating loss. You came back, you had the best record in the league. What does it mean to you to get back to the finals and get another shot at Miami?
You know, it's unbelievable to regain that focus after exactly that devastating loss that we had last year. But we're back here and we're excited about it, and we got 4 more to win. We'll do it this time.
But could they really get it done this time? Or was LeBron James and his Miami Heat going to do the incredible and three-peat? Game 3. After splitting the initial 2 battles, a repeat of the previous year's finals was seeming more and more likely. That was until a certain 2011 draft pick started to go off. Kawhi Leonard, who had averaged just 9 points in games 1 and 2, would start this battle by dropping 18 in the first half alone, all whilst being tasked with guarding one of the game's greatest players, LeBron James, who Kawhi incredibly forced into an NBA Finals record 7 turnovers whilst continuing to dominate on the offensive side, ending their Game 3 W with 29 points. Then the beautiful game simply continued. The basketball flew from player to player. Its only goal when the Spurs were on offense was to find the open man, whether that was the franchise's longtime centerpiece, its Argentinian 57th pick, their French point guard or power forward, the Australian backup PG, an Italian shooter, or anyone else on their roster. San Antonio's pure surgical dissection of the Heat's defense not only resulted in a Game 4 victory, but Tim Duncan and the Spurs franchise hoisting their 5th Larry O'Brien trophy above their heads. The Spurs would then, as usual, fail to defend their title in 2015 before being eliminated in just the second round in 2016. And then, on a random Sunday evening, with no retirement tour or press conference, Tim Duncan would announce his retirement from the NBA, a 5-time champion, 3-time MVP, 3-time Finals MVP, and to many, the greatest power forward to ever grace the hardwood and a top 5 player of all time. To think, if Hurricane Hugo never hit, Tim Duncan might just have been a name you would only know if you followed swimming.